All right, we should be good. I am.
Does it normally have a little dot in the corner? Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay. You like your. I'm getting so confused. Okay. All right, we're good. So this is the last unit. We're talking about foreign policy. Okay. So for American foreign policy, this is how we deal with other countries, right? With foreign entities. This is for my AP classes. I actually differentiate policy. We don't do a policy unit at the very end. Instead, I actually put policy in with some different things. Foreign policy really falls under the presidency. For the most part, our president is the one who is responsible for foreign policy because the president is a single entity, and a lot of foreign policy really needs one individual sort of being the vocal point, right? In Congress, for instance, if you have 435 congressmen, right, or 535 once you count the Senate, right? So 535 people, like if 250 of them believe one thing, right, and then like 285 of them believe a different thing, that's like now we're confused, like who we listening to. Okay, so a lot of foreign policy is really going to be sort of a singular voice. The big areas here are diplomacy, military, sort of international issues, and now economics has become a big aspect of it, of foreign policy as well, because we live in sort of a global economy, right? There are three main goals to foreign policy. Okay, security is number one. Economic prosperity would be number two, and then theoretically, we're concerned about like the general welfare of the world as a whole. That's not necessarily true of all foreign policy, and depending upon what kind of government you have, some governments are more or less concerned with the general welfare. Okay, security is definitely the biggest concern. So if you really wanted to get into this in like great detail, there is something called like game theory, which if you ever took like a foreign policy class in college, like you can take an entire class just on foreign policy, and how countries interact with one another. First, you need to understand that there are like state actors and then there's non-state actors that are involved in this. Non-state actors would be like terrorists. They don't actually represent a government itself. They're just out there doing what they do. Okay. For the most part, we'll focus on government actors. But when you look at sort of this conceptually and how it all plays out, security is a big concern, and it's really sort of it's incredibly complex, right? I don't know if you were aware, within the last week, the United States launched a missile at Hawaii. It was a test. Correct. Okay. And a submarine or a ship, I don't know if it was a ship. It was a ship in the Pacific Ocean, right? Fired a second missile and intercepted the first missile in midair, like blew it up. And this is part of intercontinental ballistic warfare. So now, if North Korea were to actually launch a nuke at Hawaii, we can blow that nuke up basically in the stratosphere. Right? Meaning we can blow that nuke up so far in the atmosphere that it probably wouldn't really cause any problems. Right? Like you're almost blowing it up in space. Is this a good thing?
Yeah.
Does it make us safer?
In a way.
Yes and no. So here's the thing. Does it make us safer in the sense that like North Korea can't nuke us? Absolutely. That's awesome. No, they can't. They can't. See, here's the thing. For a long time, we have operated under something called MAD, mutually assured destruction. Like nobody's firing a nuke, right? Nobody is nuking anybody because everybody got nukes, right? So if I shoot a nuke at you, as soon as that nuke gets airborne and you pick it up on radar, you're like, oh, you trying to kill me. I'm gonna launch all mine at you now. And we just all kill each other. Now nobody can kill us. Which you think goes, oh, we're a lot more secure now. We're not. Because now other countries are like, oh, we can't just regularly launch at the Americans anymore because they can knock our missiles out of the sky. So now we have to attack them in different ways. And so even defense, like defense security, increases tension and conflict as well. And so our foreign policy is guarding against national threats, right? These threats can be deemed to be anything, but we have a number of agencies like the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, the military, that are all aimed at trying to handle that. And terrorism has obviously become a major concern after 9/11, but security is also, I need you to realize that security is also not just military in nature, right? Like when the United States got involved in Somalia, for instance, back in the early 90s, like we were just providing aid to Somalia, and meaning we were giving them like food and the medical supplies and things like that, because we're trying to create stability in the region, because the more stability that exists in the world globally, the more secure we are, right? Early U.S. foreign policy is isolationism, right? In fact, we had like the Monroe Doctrine. Y'all learned about that in U.S. history, right? Monroe said what? Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Like, we got this hemisphere, y'all do your thing over there, we're done. Okay? Isolationism was so ingrained in American foreign policy that after World War I, we had the war to end all wars, right? Like, that's what it was originally called. Okay? The war to end all wars. After World War I, the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, creates something called the League of Nations. Again, you learned about this in the U.S. history class? Did the U.S. join the League of Nations? We did not. The Senate would not allow Wilson to join it, even though it was Wilson's baby. It was his idea. And that's how ingrained isolationism is in American foreign policy. That all ends basically with World War II and then the Cold War specifically. Okay? So after World War II, we now have a containment policy. We are trying to contain the spread of communism. Okay? That lasts basically for 50 years, right? From the 40s into the 90s, because we're in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. Yeah. All right. So that's our policy. Okay. During the Cold War, we did engage in preventive warfare, right? So there were times where we would engage, and when I say warfare, we're using the term warfare sort of loosely here, but it would be a first strike in order to try to stop communism. We also had appeasement, which is just giving in to hostile demands for various reasons. But ultimately, like, we could annihilate the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union could annihilate us. Everybody had nukes. Like nobody's attacking anybody. And when the USSR obtains nuclear technology, because at the end of World War II, we're the only country that has it, right? Like we used it in World War II in order to end World War II, but we're the only one that has it. And we do get in like actual hot wars against communism with Korea and Vietnam, but we won't attack the Soviet Union itself. The Soviet Union won't attack us, right? Like the Soviet Union and the Communist Chinese, they aided North Vietnam, they aided North Korea, we aided South Korea and South Vietnam. Okay, But we don't want to attack each other because we're afraid of the fallout as a result of it. And deterrence basically has two assumptions. And that if somebody attacks the United States, we will respond in kind. And then there's a rationality aspect of it, which is this is sort of like game theory stuff. That you have to understand the course of action that you take. There's going to be a reaction to it, and you have to weigh that reaction against your initial action. Theoretically, the idea here is that everybody's rational. Okay? And I do say theoretically, because hopefully you realize like Kim Jong-un is not rational. He's not. Donald Trump at times is not rational. Right? But we operate under the assumption that everybody is rational, which is probably not the best assumption to make. And deterrence is pretty good when dealing with states, like dealing with other countries. Deterrence is not so great when dealing with non-state actors such as like terrorism, right? Because obviously terrorists hit us in 9/11, and then what did we do? Like we went to a war with Iraq and Afghanistan. Where were all the terrorists from? Saudi Arabia, right? Like very complex. But when you're dealing with non-state actors, right, like terrorists, it's very easy for terrorists to pop up, hit us, and then run away. And all right, so we basically move from deterrence to preventative war, which is what Bush does. We're going to go and have like first strikes against Iraq and Afghanistan in order to try to prevent them from having the opportunity to attack us. And Obama tries to move away from this, but I mean, he doesn't end the war in Iraq or Afghanistan. Trump said he was going to do that. He doesn't really end either one of them either. Now, under Obama, we try to use sanctions and diplomacy a little bit more. Diplomacy is just relations, right? Like talking with people. Okay. So the Iran nuclear agreement, for instance, that's diplomacy. We were going to allow Iran to have nuclear power so long as they didn't weaponize that uranium. Okay. Sanctions is just the idea of putting economic pressure on a country. We do that with North Korea. Like we don't let North Korea sell coal to the rest of the world. North Korea has a fair amount of coal. We don't let them sell that coal because we don't want them making money in order to fund their nuclear programs, right? So there's actually instances in which North Korean sailing vessels, like North Korean merchant ships, will be seized in open waters because they're in violation of those sanctions. And U.S. spending on the national, as far as national defense goes, we talked about this idea already with budgeting and spending and whatnot. Defense makes up the largest portion of discretionary spending. The U.S. just spends like boatloads, so much money on national defense. It's ridiculous. Okay, like the U.S. The U.S. spends more on defense than the next like 20 some odd countries combined, right? So the United States the United States spends like $732 billion, $732 billion on national defense. China is number 2. They spend $261 billion on national defense. Then India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, but like nobody else even spends $100 billion. And so the U.S. is spending just massive sums of money on national defense. The second goal here is economic prosperity, right? Like we're trying to get rich. And again, we live in sort of a globalized economy. And so in the United States, we have to now compete with foreign markets. Okay. And so one of the reasons why this becomes important or significant is obviously in some countries, we call them third world countries, right? You have a 12-year-old kid that'll sew together Nike sneakers for like $1 a day, working a 12-hour shift with one bathroom break. Right? Now we call it a sweatshop, but you know that 12-year-old kid making $1 a day, man, he's thrilled. Like he's happy. He's happy because he's got a job and he's helping to support his family, and his family going to eat because he's working. Right? And then Nike, what's Nike doing? They're moving all their shops into Vietnam or Cambodia or Thailand or wherever, right? Where they can exploit this cheap labor, right? Because no one in this country is working for $1 a day. It does not happen. And in order to expand prosperity, we need more employment, right? We need access to foreign resources. Okay, some of those resources are things like labor, right? We need to maintain trade. Okay, in fact, if you really want to understand economically from like a governmental standpoint, you know how you get rich as a country? Well, the United States don't do this anymore, which is why we're not rich anymore, right? But you know how you actually get rich as a country? Export stuff. Make a whole bunch of crap, and I'm not joking when I say the word crap, and export it to other countries and have them pay you for it. They give you money, you give them a whole bunch of junk, right? And like you need to understand something, because economics is the way economics is today. Like you understand that everything that you're buying now is like crap, right? Like you understand that cars today, right? Like if you get 150,000 miles out of your car, that's like awesome. Congratulations, your car lasted a long time. You took good care of it, right? Automobiles from the 60s, you get 500,000 miles out of them. They would run for 500,000 miles, right? Refrigerators 40 years ago would run for 20 years, no problems. Refrigerators today, man, compressors go out, motors go out, and things break every 3-4 years. Things are designed now to be crappy. Okay? We have the technology to build light bulbs that never burn out. Ever. Do we build those light bulbs? No. Why not? Because GE trying to sell you new light bulbs every 3 years. They don't want to sell you one light bulb for your lifetime. They want to sell you 400 light bulbs for your lifetime. And all right, trade is a key component. Trade is very complex. I'm not going to get into this in a ton of detail because I don't really care all that much. You do need to understand that international trade can decrease the cost of goods. There's all kinds of like trade agreements and trade treaties that exist. There's also something called tariffs, which are taxes on traded goods, import and export tariffs. Okay. But ultimately, like, again, the consumerism and the industrialization and the globalism that exists today, U.S. factories we don't make nothing in this country anymore. Like, even like American-made cars are made in Mexico, right? Yeah, I mean, like nothing's made in this country anymore. Like, go look at all of Donald Trump's products, right? Because, you know, Donald Trump has Trump ties and Trump this and Trump that, right? It's all made in Mexico. And the World Trade Organization comes out of a general agreement, right? And sort of an international agreement on how international trade is going to be conducted, because we want to reduce barriers. We want to decrease it. The more international trade that you have, the better off that you are, according to certain economists. Right? That's one of the reasons why if you listen to Republican talking points when it comes to healthcare, they're like, oh, you got to open up like across state lines, and you got to allow for competition across state lines, because competition decreases prices, right? So the more countries that can be in competition with one another, the more prices go down, and that's a good thing. The World Trade Organization just grows out of that initial organization. And human rights, some countries care about this more than others, but it's a part of foreign policy. So when you have human rights violations and human rights issues, that it can be a priority for some countries. Like China doesn't really care. The Middle East, they don't really care. But some countries do. And it exists for all manner of reasons. But a lot of it is honestly just to sort of make us feel better about ourselves. Right. I told you already that the president has a really important role in terms of foreign policy. One, the president is commander in chief, so he can set foreign policy actions as it pertains to the military. But a president can also create executive agreements, and an executive agreement basically carries the same weight as a treaty. Did we talk about executive orders when we talked about the presidency? I'm pretty sure we did. Right? Basically just a statement about a president that carries the weight of law. Executive agreements are essentially the same. It carries the force of a treaty, but it doesn't require Senate approval. Okay, so it's easier for the president to get things done that way. That's why the Iran nuclear agreement was as an executive agreement. It wasn't a treaty. Okay, this is just Obama's national security team. This is a great little photo op of when they supposedly got Osama bin Laden. Supposedly.
What do you mean by that?
I don't believe that story.
You don't believe that story?
No.
That he didn't kill him? Oh, that he did kill him? You don't believe it?
No, that was not. They killed somebody. They didn't kill Osama bin Laden.
You don't think he killed him?
Yeah.
There's a way to bottom of the ocean.
One, why would you? Look, I mean, this is a conspiracy theory, but why would you pump that dude full of like 90 rounds? Like literally, they shot that dude 90 times. His face was unrecognizable. Two, instead of like taking him to a hospital, like a medical facility, I mean, not a hospital because he's dead, but instead of taking him to a medical facility and like doing a DNA check, they just pushed him off the side of a helicopter in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean, Mediterranean Sea. Why?
Did he even check him?
No,
What? Which is why people don't believe it. Oh,
no.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Do you think they checked him?
Well, here's the thing. You might not have to check if he was already in custody and you knew you had it.
Oh, it's like a backstory like to cover it up.
Correct.
We already got him, but we need a story.
Correct. Because he was going to die anyway. He was old.
Oh, really?
Oh God, yeah. Like we gave him weapons in the 1980s to fight the Soviets in the middle of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was old. I mean, he got like 700 children, like 47 wives. Like he was old. I'm making those numbers up. He had a lot of wives, and he did have a lot of kids. But no, like if we had found him, I mean, let's just say hypothetically, like we had found him in 2004, right? And then we had like black bagged him and put him in down in Gitmo and like just held him without trial so that he couldn't attack us again. And then he died because he was old because he had kidney problems, and so he just died. Then we probably would have to be like, hey, we need to make up a story about how this dude died because he's actually dead. And we can't pretend like forever that we didn't find him because at some point he would have to die.
someone will find it.
Well, like, who all holds that information? That's my thing.
What?
Like, that information, I'm like, oh.
That he was captured?
Yeah.
So like a SEAL team would go in and get him, right? And then it would be like highly secured like communications just for the president's eyes only. Because like you probably don't notice, but like top secret clearance in the Marine and the military, like there's literally like confidential, secret, top secret, and then there's like 14 levels of top secret. I mean, I'm being a little sarcastic, but there's multiple levels of top secret. Like I had a top secret clearance when I was in the Marine Corps, right? But like my top secret clearance in the Marine Corps was nowhere remotely close to my cousin's top secret clearance. Because my cousin was a cryptology technician for the Navy, which means he was the one that like encrypted messages, and he worked in the Pentagon.
You got
My cousin will tell you that he knows who killed Kennedy. JFK. That he knows that.
That'd be weird.
Like he knows what is actually housed at Area 51 and whether or not the US has found aliens.
Like you won't share it, like you can't share it.
No, he can't tell you that, and he won't. You could get him hammered, he won't tell you.
Do you think like, does he have a wife?
What?
Does he have a wife?
No, he's not married. He's never married.
Do you think like,
I mean, he's dated the same woman now for like 15 years.
I feel like I was on my
think
deathbed.
he knows?
No.
Wouldn't they kill you?
Here's the thing. He got out of the Navy. He works for the FBI now and basically does the same stuff. Like he still has ridiculously high clearance levels. Like that would cost him his job and he would go to prison. Like he's not telling anybody, I promise you.
What about like when you're retired?
No,
Never?
no, he won't tell you on his deathbed.
But you're about to die.
Doesn't matter. He will take them secrets to the grave, I promise you. Okay, foreign policy, as far as the bureaucracy goes, there's a whole bunch of different agencies that play roles in foreign policy. Those are what's listed there. Congress can influence foreign policy a little bit. The biggest one here is this second one down here. Congress controls money, right? So in reality, a president is commander in chief. If the president wants to send a military somewhere, he can, right? But if Congress refuses to pay for it, Congress could trump the president there, right? Like they could really force the president to bring the troops home because there's no money, because the troops are not going to go do it if they're not getting paid, right? But technically, Congress also has the power to declare war, and Congress, like the Senate, also approves treaties and things like that. I mean, there's armed services committees in Congress. There's a committee on foreign relations. There's committees on intelligence that oversee that stuff. But that's more oversight than it is direct policy implementation, right? And you should understand the difference with Congress, right? Like policy implementation is Congress saying like, hey, you got to go do this. Oversight is just watching what the bureaucracy did and then being like, yeah, CIA, I don't think it was okay that you went into Nicaragua and just executed a dude, which the CIA used to do. Y'all know that, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
No, but like regime change, like the US used to do it all the time. Like literally, you go look at Vietnam, for instance, right? The Vietnam War. Do you know what the president of South Vietnam was? DM. His last name was DM, right? I forget his first name. The United States just put that dude in power. You know where he was from? Jersey. They found the dude. He was a Catholic living in New Jersey. Now he was Vietnamese. His family had immigrated from Vietnam, right? But like he was a pro-American Catholic. Vietnam is what, a Buddhist nation? Yeah, it's a Buddhist nation, right? Like that's the predominant religion. This dude is a Catholic. And then when we realized that he was a terrible president and he was incredibly corrupt and like just appointed his own family members to like all kinds of important positions. And then we were like, yeah, you're killing South Vietnam. Guess what we did? We executed the dude and tried to put somebody else in charge because that's what America does. That's American foreign policy. Interest groups will try to influence foreign policy, but again, interest groups also try to influence everything. Okay, so there's all kinds of. I mean, there's business interest groups that are looking at like economic issues. There are some ideological interest groups that are looking at like U.S. foreign relations with Middle Eastern nations and with Israel and what the U.S. is doing in the Middle East and all of that stuff. Amnesty International is a good example as far as human rights interest groups go. They're looking at human rights violations all across the world and trying to get the U.S. more involved in that to advocate for the basic sort of basic treatments of humanity. Okay. Modern foreign policy, obviously diplomacy matters. The United Nations is a significant part of that diplomacy. The United Nations now takes over a significant amount of sort of international relations. We all have, I say we all, but there's 190 188 countries in the UN. I forget. You could look it up. But there's like there's almost 200 countries in the United Nations. There's like 240 countries in the world. Okay, there's almost 200 in the United Nations. Just so you understand, there are more countries that are a part of FIFA, right, which is international soccer, than there are that are a part of the United Nations. But the United Nations covers most countries. Okay, most countries now will sort of abide by whatever the UN says. The UN is essentially a Congress. It's a governing body amongst the nations. There are 5 countries: the United States, China, Russia, England, and France, that are on what's called the Security Council. They are the permanent members. The Security Council can veto anything. There are 2 other countries that rotate onto the Security Council from time to time. And you should understand, like, there's some people that are like, oh, that's wrong that the U.S. is a permanent, Security Council member. Listen to me. The United States and Djibouti ain't the same. Okay? Djibouti should not have as much power internationally as the United States does. Okay? Like, that's just facts. You know, Djibouti is a real country, right? I'm not making that up. Y'all know that? Djibouti? Djibouti's right next to Somalia. It's on the Horn of Africa. In fact, like right behind Kaylee, it's like right there. You know what the capital of Djibouti is? Djibouti. It's Djibouti. Now you have learned something that you did not know before. Okay. So these are basically how foreign policy is carried out today, right? Diplomacy is just relations between governments, right? Like diplomacy is generally like trying to talk things out, right? You have ambassadors, you have people that represent foreign governments. They're trying to do things peacefully, right? The United Nations tries to help with that, but again, there we go, 192, right? 192. In order to get things accomplished, like the United Nations sometimes really can't get anything accomplished. 2, the United Nations really doesn't have any, like, there's no authority to the United Nations either, right? If the United Nations is like, hey, America, you were wrong to attack Afghanistan, America is just going to look at the UN and be like, so what? What are you going to do about it? Because the UN can't do anything, ultimately. Okay? The Security Council does exist, though. Oh, I guess they moved it up to 15. Excuse me for a second. Baker. What's up? Initials TA. Okay. And wanted the grades updated by 4th period? Yeah, no, don't worry about it. I mean, I need it like ideally by tomorrow, because tomorrow's the end of the progress report. And I think last time I looked, she had 67 in her class. Yeah, okay. Appreciate it. Thanks for letting me know. Bye. Okay.
Why is France on there? I don't get that.
Okay, so the permanent, so the UN comes out of World War II, right? Because we had the League of Nations, and then the League of Nations like didn't happen, and the US never joined it, and we actually told Germany you weren't welcome, which is a terrible way to do things, right? And so then we had World War II, and then we were like, okay, we kind of need this international organization. Well, the 5 major victorious countries in World War II were the United States, England, France, Japan, China, and then the Soviet Union, which is now Russia. So those 5 became the permanent members of the Security Council, and I guess they now have 10 more. They used to be only 2, but that makes sense that they've upped that, because 7 probably wasn't enough. But you also have to have an odd number because they vote on stuff. They all also have veto powers, right? Other international stuff, so like again, because of globalization, we now have like the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, and we have a World Bank. Again, they don't wield necessarily that much power, but they try to help regulate economic issues, and specifically these are trying to look at providing aid to developing nations, because the reality is, like as Africa becomes more developed and Africa becomes more economically like stable and viable and prosperous, that helps other nations become more prosperous as well, right? Like when Africa takes one step forward economically, like the United States can take 2 steps forward, because that's how rich and poor works. Okay. Aid, sanctions, and then economic aid. Sanctions is stopping aid. Aid is just giving money to other countries. Dude, oh my God, the U.S. gives so much money to foreign countries. It's ridiculous. Like we should have talked about this with Festivus. Because I mean, some of it's so absurd, right? I'm trying to think of some of the things that we've spent money on. Like we spent money studying the gambling habits of Ugandans. Yeah. Well, because I guess Ugandans have a gambling. I don't even know why. But again, by helping these countries, the theory is that we're ultimately helping the United States as well. That's sort of the idea. Collective security is generally deemed to be better than isolationist security and sort of MAD. So instead of everybody having nukes and everybody killing everybody, we have permanent like alliances. And now if like England gets attacked, we go defend England, right? And if we go defend England, so does France and Spain and all of these other countries. And then we're just going to end up in like World War III, but whatever. Like, nobody asked me this. And there are all sorts of like different alliances and agreements. And then it would be really fascinating. Like, I mean, if Australia attacked England, like, I don't even know, like the US would be like, I don't know what to do because we're friends with both of them. So I would say this. It would probably be, we would probably look at it and be like, who is morally wrong, and we would aid the other side, right? Like part of the reason why we aided England in the world wars is because Germany was the aggressor. Like if Germany had not been the aggressor, if like England had invaded Germany, we probably would have backed Germany, right? Like that's just the way that it is. Usually military force is considered a last resort because anytime it's in the like military force is not a good thing. Like military force is bad because ultimately it's very costly and it's detrimental to all like because there's all sorts of like collateral damage to military actions, right? For instance, when you kill or when you fight, like not only are you killing enemy soldiers, but you're also devastating infrastructure and like crops and all sorts of other things. And so it hurts like financially for maybe a generation later, or at least years and years, if not decades and decades. So it's generally a last resort. So that takes us to the end of this. Foreign policy is important. And I will say this, because I think we talked about this again with the presidency. When we look at presidents and when we evaluate presidents, a lot of the times we call this, and I believe in this theory, sort of the dual president theory, where you have a domestic president and you have a foreign policy president, and they operate at the same time. It's the same person. But you can have somebody that's really good at one and really bad at the other, right? And so it just depends on how we view them. Can I help you? Oh, are you my speaker? Yep, you're like 10 or 15 minutes early.
We'll continue.
Oh, no, we're done. We're done with this lecture. So any questions? No, wonderful. All right. You have a quiz due tonight. All right, you have a quiz due tonight.